The Emperor of Mankind spent decades crafting 20 perfect suns in secret laboratories beneath Terra. These weren't just super soldiers, they were meant to be his proconsuls, each one a master of war and leadership who would unite the galaxy under Imperial rule. But in a single, catastrophic moment, everything went wrong. The Chaos Gods tore open a warp rift beneath the Himalayan mountains and scattered these unborn demigods across the galaxy. What should have been the Emperor's greatest triumph became his most devastating defeat before the Great Crusade even began. But what exactly was that original plan? The Emperor's vision, described in the Primarch project, felt like a shortcut to conquest. I'm talking about a strategy so brilliant that humanity could have conquered the galaxy in decades instead of centuries. The Emperor wasn't just some random warlord with big dreams. He spent decades crafting the most ambitious project in human history. But here's the thing. Nobody really talks about what the original plan actually was before everything went sideways. The process itself was incredibly complex. First, extracting a subset of his own DNA to create pure, undifferentiated Primarch gene stock. Then, carefully differentiating that template into 20 separate genetic blueprints. Each Primarch was designed to embody a specific aspect of warfare and leadership. They weren't just super soldiers, they were living weapons of conquest. One would be a perfect strategist, another the ultimate warrior, and yet another would inspire loyalty just by walking into a room. The genetic engineering that went into creating these beings was so advanced, it borders on the supernatural. The Primarchs were meant to be more than generals. They were going to be the Emperor's proconsuls, ruling entire sectors of the galaxy. 20 demigods, each one governing hundreds of worlds, all perfectly loyal to their father. Each Primarch would lead their own Space Marine Legion, but they'd also be administrators, diplomats, and living symbols of imperial power. Instead of the brutal, centuries-long slog that became the Great Crusade, you'd have 20 perfectly coordinated campaigns led by beings who were basically gods in human form. The Emperor's vision was a galaxy united not through endless war, but through the overwhelming superiority of its godlike sons. The Emperor's laboratories housed 20 giants floating in massive gestation pods, each one radiating power even while unconscious. The Primarchs weren't just bigger space marines, they were something completely different, something that had never existed before. But what exactly made them so special that even the Chaos Gods feared what they might become? Subject 6 showed canine-like DNA, hinting at Russ's lupine nature. The research shows this explains why Leman Russ and his space wolves act like a pack of wolves half the time. Even while they were still cooking in their pods, each Primarch generated massive psychic resonance. Guards would walk past the chambers and suddenly feel inspired to fight harder or scared out of their minds. These guys could inspire loyalty and fear before they were even conscious. The gestation vault was protected by arcane glyphs in the most powerful Geller field ever made. That's not normal human psychology. That's straight-up supernatural charisma baked right into their DNA. Each Primarch's genetics would serve as a template for an entire Space Marine Legion. They were basically living gene seed factories. Every single Space Marine would carry a piece of their Primarch's genetic code, creating armies that shared their father's strengths and personality traits. The Chaos Gods had been watching the Emperor's work from the warp, and they knew exactly what his success would mean for them. A unified galaxy under Imperial rule would basically put them out of business. But how do you steal 20 demigods from the most powerful psyker in the galaxy while he's standing right there? The answer is, you create the biggest warp storm in human history and aim it right at his baby nursery. The Chaos Gods didn't just throw some random tantrum. This was surgical sabotage of the Emperor's greatest work. They opened a localized warp rift right inside the gene vaults deep under the Himalayan mountains. Reality itself started bending and breaking around the gestation pods like someone was folding space-time into origami. Shattered equipment everywhere. 20 massive gestation chambers cracked open like broken eggs. Specialized fluids that had taken decades to perfect now pooling on the floor. But the worst part wasn't the physical damage. It was the psychic echoes. The Emperor felt their primal psychic screams. his first and only warning of Chaos's hand as the gestation pods were spiraled into the immaterium around 792.M30. Each Primarch got flung to a different world across the galaxy. Some landed on death worlds where everything wants to kill you. Others ended up on civilized planets where they could actually grow up normally. But all of them were lost to their father. 20 perfect suns scattered like seeds in a cosmic hurricane with no way to know where they'd ended up or if they'd even survived their trip. The Emperor's reaction wasn't what you'd expect. No rage, no despair, just cold, calculating science as he realized the scope of what had been stolen from him. This guy had just watched his life's work get destroyed in minutes. This single moment changed the entire future of humanity. Instead of a quick, clean conquest led by 20 demigods, there would be centuries of brutal war. But the Emperor of Mankind didn't become the ruler of Terra by giving up when things went wrong. He adapted by salvaging what remained and building something entirely different. The Emperor stood in his ruined laboratory with a choice: abandon his dream of galactic conquest, or find another way forward. But how do you create an army of super soldiers when the genetic templates for that army are scattered across the galaxy? The Emperor got down on his hands and knees and started collecting every scrap of genetic material he could find. Fragments of DNA stuck to broken glass, incomplete gene sequences corrupted by warp exposure, samples that were maybe half viable on a good day. This wasn't the pristine genetic perfection he'd spent decades creating. This was biological garbage that most scientists would have thrown in the trash. But the Emperor wasn't most scientists. He handed all this broken mess over to the Imperial Biotechnical Division, who had already been working on Space Marine gene seed implants for decades using genetic material derived from the Primarchs. This earlier work allowed for bulk creation of transhuman warriors despite the missing Primarch templates. The Imperium reverse-engineered gene seed from fragmented templates, producing a first wave of Space Marines under constraint. The scientists worked around the clock, running test after test, trying to figure out how to turn corrupted DNA fragments into something that could create transhuman warriors. The first Space Marines that came out of this process were pale copies of what the Primarchs would have been. They were powerful, sure, but flawed and incomplete in ways that would cause problems for centuries. Some legions had genetic quirks that made them go crazy. Others had organs that didn't work right. All of them were missing that perfect genetic stability that Primarchs would have provided. But the Emperor had a new strategy now. Create the legions first, then use them to search for his lost sons across the galaxy. The first legions Astartes born this way launched in 798.M30, just 6 years after the scattering. Terra's shipyards worked overtime building the fleets that would carry these new warriors to the stars. Massive battleships rolled off production lines like cars in a factory. And so, the Great Crusade began, not with a triumph, but as something far more personal than anyone realized at the time. What followed was a galaxy-spanning search mission disguised as a conquest. The Emperor's greatest tragedy wasn't the Horus Heresy or the Siege of Terra. It was that single moment when his perfect vision was shattered, anchoring the very conditions that would make the heresy inevitable. Every battle of the Great Crusade, every world brought into compliance, every Space Marine who died in service to the Imperium, all of it traces back to that night when 20 sons were stolen from their father. As the Emperor sits upon the Golden Throne, his silent watch still bears the weight of those lost sons.